Hi there, Steve Kaufman here, the linguist on language. I want to talk today about non-native teachers. It's a little bit dark here. See if I can. Non-native teachers of languages, and with particular reference to the controversy which we have right now in the state of Arizona in the United States about the apparent decision of the Board of Education there to ask those teachers who teach English and who have a strong accent or major problems with grammar to no longer teach English, that those teachers should teach other subjects or try to improve, but they shouldn't be teaching English if they have a strong accent or don't or make a lot of mistakes in grammar. This has caused a tremendous amount of consternation amongst teachers and other people who feel this is unjust and so forth. So I'd like to comment on this from a number of different points of view. First of all, I'd like to talk about the role of non-native teachers, and then I will talk about my view of the situation in Arizona. Insofar as non-native teachers are concerned, the vast majority of language teachers in the world are non-native speaking teachers. And I am quite sure that a non-native speaking teacher can be just as good a teacher as a native speaking teacher. And nowadays, there is so much content available via the internet and other places. Audio, obviously text was always there, but there is just so many ways in which a teacher can bring the language spoken by the native speaker to his or her students that the non-native speaking teacher can be just as effective. And in some ways, if the non-native speaking teacher understands the predicament of the learner better, that non-native speaking teacher might be better able to inspire, encourage the learner. So speaking objectively, I have nothing against non-native speaking teachers, and they are necessarily going to be the main workforce around the world, because in most places where they teach foreign languages, that foreign language, by definition, isn't spoken in the local community. So that's first of all. Now, you may know from my previous videos that I believe that dependence on a teacher is not a good thing, that learners should learn to become independent learners. Now, a native speaking teacher or a non-native speaking teacher can be equally good, in principle, at encouraging the learner to become independent. And that, to me, is the ultimate role of the teacher, to make the learner an independent learner. And I see no reason why a non-native speaking teacher couldn't do that just as well as a native speaking teacher. So that's point number one. However, because most teachers see their role as that of teaching in the classroom, teaching the language, rather than cultivating and creating and nurturing independent learners, to the extent that the teacher is teaching the language, there's no question that the native speaker will make a better teacher. And the reason, in my view, is this, and that is that a language is different from other subjects like math or physics or so forth. It's different because, as I've said before in my videos, the attitude of the learner is so important. And a native speaker, in my view, is a greater inspiration for most people. If I want to learn Chinese, I'm much more inspired by the idea that I'm face-to-face with a Chinese person. Or if I'm learning Hindu or Polish or Mongolian, I don't want to be face-to-face with an American or a British person or a, Swedish person. I want to be face-to-face with a native speaker. That, to me, inspires me. That's stimulating. I want to be like that person. I want to join that person's language group. So that's much more motivating. I cannot imagine that foreign students who travel to Spain or England or France or Germany or Japan to learn the local language would accept to have a non-native speaking teacher. If they go to Shanghai to learn Chinese, they don't want to be taught by an American or an Indian or a Japanese. I think that there's, generally speaking, people are more inclined to want to learn from a native speaker. Now, as I've said before, at what point do you need that interaction with a native speaker? In my mind, not very early. There's lots you can do on your own before you need that interaction. But when the interaction comes along, I think it's more of an inspiration to be dealing with a native speaker. But a skilled native speaker, non-native speaker, could perhaps encourage the same kind of enthusiasm in a learner. I don't know. But I personally, and I think a majority of people, if given the choice, would rather have a native speaker. So that's the first point that I would like to make. With regard to the situation in Arizona, what happened there was that Arizona has more and more Hispanic people moving in. Some years ago, the government of the state decided to bring in a lot of Spanish-speaking teachers. They recruited them in Latin America, and they were going to make the state of Arizona bilingual. Now they have a different government, as I understand it, and this government doesn't think it's a good idea for the state to be bilingual. So they're trying to cut back. And the demographics in Arizona are such that in grade 12, something like 12% of the students are Spanish speaking, but in grade 1, 45% of the students are Spanish speaking. So in other words, there is a bit of a language struggle taking place in the state of Arizona, which is not unlike what I have experienced in Quebec, what I read about in Catalonia, what I read about in Latvia or Estonia, where you have two language groups struggling for power. Is the state of Arizona going to become a bilingual state, or is English going to prevail as the language of the state? The group that is in power right now, that were voted in democratically, want Arizona to be English-speaking. So that means that anybody with the name Sanchez Lopez or whatever, who arrives from Mexico, they would like him in the second generation to be an English speaker. Just as in Quebec, which when I grew up, Montreal was 30% English speaking, the government there decided that Quebec was going to be unilingual French in order to ensure the survival of the French language. They didn't want to become more and more Anglified. And similarly in Latvia, where there are only 1 million and some Latvian speakers in the world, they decided that they wanted to push back and insist that any Russian speakers who lived in Latvia should have to learn the language. So the idea of these language struggles are quite common. But of course, the reaction amongst many of the sort of left-leaning teacher fraternity to the situation in Arizona is to call it all racist and bigoted and stuff. Well, to me, it's just a matter of democratic choice. If the citizens of Arizona vote in a government that wants the state to be bilingual, they'll be bilingual. If they vote in a government that says we want the state to be unilingual, that's what they end up with. But in all of this, what really surprised me was, because I happened to be on this listserv where English teachers comment on different things, was this, to find out that 25% of English as a second language teachers in the United States are non-native speakers. 25% of the teachers who teach immigrants English are non-native speakers. I find that surprising. Not because those teachers can't be effective within the limits of what you can do in a classroom, and I think that there are severe limits to what you can do in a classroom, but because I think that a majority of people would naturally prefer to have native speakers as teachers. Whether justified or not, that would be the preference of a majority of learners. I think. I could be wrong. Certainly, that would be my preference. So I was surprised to find out that 25% of all English as a second language teachers are non-native speakers. Anyway, there you have it. I don't think the situation in Arizona is racist. I think non-native speakers can be effective, but I prefer native speakers. Thank you. Bye.